Now, I get the sense that Game Week 12 might be quite a popular time for managers to use their wildcards, or maybe you just want to know what I think the best team in FPL looks like right now. Well, I've got you covered with a wildcard team in this video. Alright, we're going to start off then by looking at the defence, and I've got Solio's projected clean sheet odds here for the next 5 game weeks. If you want to check out Solio for yourself, I'll leave a link in the description for it below. We've got Arsenal as the top team for clean sheet odds. Next 5 games, they're averaging well over 30%, and most of them over 40%. I think there's no denying that Arsenal were the best defence in the league. Next couple of fixtures being Tottenham and Chelsea aren't the easiest. I wouldn't absolutely rule out them keeping clean sheets in those games either. I think the thing with Arsenal is it's not a question of do you have a defender in your team, it's how many. Man City, from 13 onwards, their odds look pretty good, but I just think with their European competitions and just how many fixtures there are until Christmas, I don't necessarily back any of them to 100% start every game. Newcastle, I don't think their away from home record is good enough to consider their options defensively. I don't mind Liverpool and Chelsea. Not sure I trust Man United or Aston Villa. And then you've got Fulham, Crystal Palace and Bournemouth, who have, I'd say, some interesting defensive options from their teams. And the important thing for them is they're also reasonably priced. We might talk about some Fulham, Crystal Palace and Bournemouth defenders later on. But we spoke, first of all, about the Arsenal defence, right? And I mentioned it's not just a question of, do you have some Arsenal defence in your team? It's how many. And I look at all the Arsenal options available to us in FPL at the moment, and to be honest, I haven't even covered all of them on this graphic because there's so many, I can't. I've missed Declan Rice, Calafiori, Saliba. There's probably others as well. I think Gabriel is a must. He's probably the number 1 Arsenal asset, right? Because he can score points through any different mean. Goals, assists from set plays, from flick-ons and stuff. DEFCON, he gets bonus points as well, and of course, keeping clean sheets. The rest of the Arsenal defence is interesting because I'd suggest you might want to be doubled up. But they all kind of have the same issues, I suppose, whereas they probably only score points if they keep a clean sheet. I don't think, outside of Gabriel, there's not many Arsenal defenders that are racking in the attacking returns, nor are they really getting DEFCON. And with David Raya, he's keeping clean sheets, of course, but he's not necessarily making saves, so for a lot of these, the rest of the Arsenal defence, their kind of ceiling of points is 6. And for David Raya, I think the gap between him and the rest of the goalkeepers in FPL is bigger than the gap between Timber and the rest of the defenders in FPL, if that makes sense. So that probably leads me to thinking that the ideal Arsenal defensive double up is Raya and Gabriel. Then outside of that, you're looking for an attacker. You might be limited by budget, so your decision is made. But I think I'd probably go with Bukayo Saka. He just kind of ticks the box of that. With Gyökeres in the team, he's not quite the talisman anymore. But I think he's going to take penalties. Or, well, he has an opportunity to take penalties at least. He's proven this season he can score points through multiple different means, much like Gabriel. He's hit DEFCON occasionally, attacking returns, bonus points. So that would be where I'm at with Arsenal, I think. Ideal triple up is probably Raya, Gabriel and Saka, but obviously that depends on your budget. And we spoke about clean sheet odds and stuff. I said I was relatively interested in the Liverpool defence. They've got Forest, West Ham, Sunderland, Leeds, Brighton in their next 5 games, and some really good clean sheet odds. And also, their longer-term fixtures are sensational, really, beyond just those 5. Got those 5 out of the way, and then they play Tottenham away, which is obviously fairly tough, and then they got Wolves, Leeds and Fulham in their next 3 after that. I do think the Liverpool fixtures are really good. It's just a question of who do you have. I guess Konate is starting regularly for them now. Conor Bradley is also starting regularly, but I don't know about him as an option. Which leads me to thinking that Virgil van Dijk is probably the one to go for. I think even though he didn't score a goal against Man City, it got ruled out for offside. I think him getting that opportunity suggests that he is a threat from set plays. I think he's going to get some attacking returns this season. He's one of the leading defenders in the game for defensive contribution points per game, and Liverpool have some really good fixtures. So I think Van Dijk probably going to be in this wildcard team. There's another category of defender as well. I mentioned when looking at the clean sheet odds, we've got Bournemouth, Crystal Palace, Fulham, who have odds that I quite like, and also players from their teams that I quite like. And I've got to say, I think these 3 would be in a category of sort of defensive contribution points monsters. And you kind of get what you pay for with all of them, really. Senesi, he is, well, a level above the other two in terms of defcons per 90, basically hitting 13, but he is 5 million now in the game. You got Richards and Anderson, 4.5, and they're on around 10. For me, I probably prefer Richards to Anderson because I think the Crystal Palace defence is slightly better. And then Senesi, I think he's good value too at 5 million. There's also one further category of defender I think you should probably have in your wildcard team. It may be budget dependent depending on what you have available, but I think there are so many of these sort of minimum price defenders in the game at the moment, 4.2 million and below, that are genuinely pickable. Like, you've got a couple of Leeds assets there, Mukiele, Alderete from Sunderland, Esteve, Goodmanson, Twanzebe, Hartman, all of these guys sort of minimum price picks, and I think you could pick all of them. For me, though, I think my favourite is probably Mukiele, but going through all of that data and players there should give you an idea of the kind of players you want to pick. By the way, this stat here shows Solio predicted points over the next, 5 weeks. So again, there's a link to Solio in the description. So that leads me to picking a defence, I think, that looks like this. You got David Raya and Gabriel for an Arsenal double-up alongside Virgil van Dijk and Anderson. On the bench for this team is Dubravka, Chris Richards, although if you fancy Chris Richards ahead of Anderson, this is Fantasy Football Hub expected points. And by the way, all of the team graphics you're going to see here and the data is brought to you by Fantasy Football Hub, and there's a link to that in the description as well if you want to sign up and get this view for your team yourself. You could start Richards over Anderson, and then I've gone for Mukiele and Freddie Potts, who I think he's not going to get a special mention in this video in terms of a graphic, but I think he's the best of the minimum price midfielders because seems to be a Nuno favourite and he's hitting DEFCON every game. So I think that's a pretty sensible defence to go with. I just wanted to quickly mention as well the FPL cartel that I've started with my good mate FPL Tom. It's an exclusive members-only zone. You'll see on my channel there's some FPL Cartel podcasts that have already been produced. As part of the FPL Cartel, that exclusive weekly podcast will be behind the FPL Cartel paywall from now on. So if you want to see that podcast on a weekly basis, obviously sign up to the Cartel. Everything will be managed inside a private Discord, which is basically our members-only community. Both me and Tom will be in there to provide live sort of team advice as well. There's just general good chat in there at the moment, which has been really fun to be a part of, to be honest. And of course, we'll do a members-only mini league with some prizes as well. So if you're interested in the FPL Cartel, both me and Tom involved, you can sign up using the link in the description below, and you get 30 days free. Your first 30 days as a free trial. Right, so moving on to the more attacking players, and similar to what we did previously, we're going to have a look at some projected goals data this time from Solio. And the top team is actually Liverpool. Now, Liverpool, yeah, I'm excited by the fixtures that they've got. But other than, well, even Salah, like, would you pay the money to have Salah in your team at the moment? Probably not, based on the form that he's been in at the moment. Yes, they might be projected to score lots of goals, but I couldn't put my finger on a Liverpool attacker that I actually want. I think each of them have their own downsides. You look at the forwards, you've got Gakpo, Wirtz, Ekitike, Isak, Salah. I think bar Salah, they're all minutes worries, I would say. They're all competing with each other for the same positions. None of the midfielders really excite me at the moment. I'd say probably Szoboszlai might be the best, but he's on 4 yellow cards at the moment, so I can't realistically tell you that you should buy Szoboszlai when he's 1 yellow card away from a suspension. So that leads me to think, yes, they might be top for projected goals, but honestly, long term, I couldn't say with any level of truth that I would back any of them at the moment. We've spoken about Arsenal players already. I think the Arsenal attack is viable. I'd probably go for Saka, but up to you who you go for. They're up there. Man City are up there too, but again, it's similar to Liverpool really. Outside of Erling Haaland, who do I back to play every game and do really well? I'm not sure there is anyone. And then you move on to Man United, who I think are quite exciting. They've got some really good fixtures coming up, right up until sort of the 7th of January, really. And I think there are a couple of Man United midfielders that are performing really well in the game at the moment, namely Bruno Fernandes, I think, and Bryan Mbeumo. And we have a look, we've got here the top projected points for midfielders for the next 5 weeks. Salah is top, and that doesn't really surprise me, but he's 14.2 million. That's the issue we spoke about. The second top midfielder for expected points over the next 5 is Bruno Fernandes. Then it's Bukayo Saka, and then you've got Bryan Mbeumo and Cunha. So I think you definitely want to be looking at the likes of Bryan Mbeumo and Bruno Fernandes, I would say, which leads me to pick in this midfield for this team. So I've gone Bukayo Saka, Antoine Semenyo, Bruno Fernandes, and Iliman Ndiaye. Spoke about Bukayo Saka already. I've gone for Semenyo for more affordability, but if you have like unlimited funds in FPL or loads and loads of money, I would definitely suggest, at the moment at least, that Bryan Mbeumo is probably better than Semenyo as an option in the game. The only thing with Mbeumo is he's off to AFCON, but at the same time, you get your 5 AFCON transfers when they all go. So I wouldn't worry too much about picking players off to AFCON. I don't think Semenyo is going with Ghana because they didn't qualify. And then you've got on the right of this midfield, Bruno Fernandes and Iliman Ndiaye. And I think both of these are sort of the same player, just at different price points. Iliman Ndiaye is not quite as good as Bruno Fernandes, in my opinion, but he's cheaper, and they score FPL points through every mean, right? Goals, assists, they're both on penalties, and they're reasonable for that. Bruno Fernandes is better for DEFCON than Iliman Ndiaye, but Iliman Ndiaye, out of some of the more attacking midfielders, is outstanding in terms of the way he picks up DEFCON points. So I think I'd go for a midfield 4 that looks something like this. But if you'll see how much all the teams cost and stuff at the end. This is going to be quite an expensive team already. But if you can afford it, I would probably have Bryan Mbeumo over Semenyo, I think. And then we look at some forwards. So, I mean, you don't think you're going to be too surprised to see Haaland is the top forward for the next 5 weeks. It's obvious. Isak's in second, but that assumes a level of minutes that he's playing, which I don't think will happen. And then the next best forwards after Haaland, essentially, are Mateta and Thiago. And I'll just go back to the midfield a second. There's a category of midfielder in the game at the moment, right? A 6 point mid-million midfielder, 6.5-ish million midfielder, right? And you've got Enzo Fernandez, Declan Rice, Ismail Assar. None of them, not Iliman Ndiaye isn't exactly ripping up trees, but I think he's the best. None of them are like absolutely killing it in the game at the moment, but Igor Thiago is. You know, and when you're on your wildcard, you have ability to change your formation and, you know, you're free to do what you want. Igor Thiago is cheaper than a lot of those midfielders, and I think quite a lot better in FPL. So I've gone with this team, a front 3 of Erling Haaland, Jean-Philippe Mateta, and Igor Thiago. I think that makes for a pretty strong team. So we've got some scores on the doors then, courtesy of Fantasy Football Hub. Now, like I said, this team is quite expensive. The one I've spoken about here, it's 103 million. But I think a fair few FPL managers will have quite a lot of these players in their team already, to the point where you may have gained some value in some of them. Like, I imagine you probably have Haaland, probably have Mateta, other players like that. So 103 million might not be impossible to get to, but there are certainly some ways you could save yourself some cash, right? Namely, you could drop David Raya to another goalkeeper. I don't mind Rob Sanchez, for example. You could also drop Virgil van Dijk to maybe a Senesi, something like that. And you could also drop Bukayo Saka to maybe a Bryan Mbeumo. So a team like this as well, this gets a 98% rating courtesy of Fantasy Football Hub, and it's only 100.3 million. So everyone should be able to afford this team, with Sanchez and Mbeumo replacing Raya and Saka. So yeah, hopefully I've made a team there that accommodates your budget, available budget in FPL. And I'll be honest, I certainly don't think Saka down to Mbeumo is a massive downgrade given the form that Mbeumo's in currently. But yeah, if I was on a wild card and I had the money, I'm looking at this team and I think I want this team to be my own. So yeah, I hope you found that useful. Let me know if you'd make any changes to it in the comments. Alright, well, that is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that and found it useful. I just got the sense that quite a lot of people might actually be using their wildcards for Game Week 12, so I thought I'd drop a video in with my favourite team. So yeah, if you'd make any changes to it, do let me know in the comments. Apologies that the first team I went through is quite expensive, but I've given you some alternatives if you can't quite get there. You know, like I said, I think Sanchez, Dean Henderson, both valid alternatives maybe to David Raya. Senesi, I think, is a valid alternative to Van Dijk, and Mbeumo, you could drop Saka down to Mbeumo if you need to as well. So hopefully there's some decent alternatives there for you. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a like rating, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the Golden Goal channel, which should be just there, back there on your screen. And yeah, thanks very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.